We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Apologies from me for the slightly shorter show last week, although I'm sure some people appreciate a slightly shorter run time. But we got a packed list this week, so we'll see how long Tom is able to go, because I got no time limit. And gonna try to...
I've got to work, man. I mean, I
That's
got
right.
things to do.
No, I'm not planning to go past 2 hours, but hoping to get the actual 2 hours that we normally do this week. I want to try and quickly go through intros and all that to get to the questions, because we have lots of them. So to talk about what we watched this week, I watched a movie on Netflix called RRR. That is the title.
I thought you gave up. I thought you dropped Netflix.
Well, so, I mean, I get it sometimes. Stranger Things is back, so I'm checking that out. I decided to not pay for the 4 streams 4K HDR, so I'm suffering watching everything on Netflix in 1080p SDR. Just got the HD stream, but I can see the content.
Suffer?
I do suffer. But I can see the content. So RRR, Rise, Roar, Revolt is the subtitle to that. It's not really, I don't think, what the RRR stands for, but they threw that in there. So this is a movie from India.
Yeah, I love Indian theater.
Yeah.
Bollywood, man.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is actually out of Bollywood. It has some musical numbers in it.
Well... Still,
but it doesn't quite feel like a full-on Bollywood movie. So this got a lot of hype. Apparently, it's really popular on Netflix. I did check it out. It was not exactly what I expected.
Never is.
The way people were...
Indian movies never fail to surprise you, and you're like, wait, what's going on now?
Well, the way people were describing it online, they were talking about it being just like crazy over the top, wild action scenes, like just madcap. Go see it in a theater because everyone's going to be cheering and clapping for stuff. And like, I have definitely seen some Indian movies that are very much like that, where they're just like, let's just go nuts and throw everything at it. And I mean, it's over the top. It knows that it's being over the top, and it has fun with it, and it's laughing at itself and all of those things. But it actually had a lot more seriousness to it and heart in it than I was expecting. And it wasn't like wall-to-wall action by any means. It's just that when they did do an action scene, they went silly with it.
That's the thing about Indian movies. For those of you who have never watched an Indian movie before, first of all, you absolutely should.
Yes, you should.
I don't.
They are very
pick
entertaining.
Pick one that's. But the thing that you're going to get is whiplash, because you're going to be in the middle of a scene and you're going to feel like, okay, I understand what this movie is now. This is this type of movie, and all of a sudden, bam, action, bam, musical number, bam, romance. You know what I mean? It completely changes tenor on a dime.
Yeah, I guess that would be true of RRR, except that, I mean, it does flow together well. So what they're doing here, they're taking 2 real-life people who were revolutionaries in the 1920s. This was when India was still fully under British rule. It is not difficult to tell who the bad guys are in this movie. The British, as depicted in this movie, have no redeeming qualities whatsoever, except for one. There is one British character who's like, oh, she's all right. And so, these were real people. So we've got a couple of quite famous Indian actors, NTR Jr. Playing Bheem, and Ram Charan playing Sitarama Raju. And, okay, I do want to say right away, Ram Charan is a very good-looking man, very, very charismatic. And it would shock me, like looking through his IMDb page, he doesn't have a ton of credits as an actor. It would kind of shock me if someone in Hollywood doesn't notice this guy and get him in something quick, because he definitely would appeal to American audiences. I have very little question of that. So these real life people, this is in no way, it's not even remotely historically accurate. It's not meant to be. It is complete historical fiction. I think the easiest way to describe it, if you're trying to picture what type of movie this is, just think of the title Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So this is like real life Indian revolutionaries as ridiculous action heroes, which they were not in real life, but they did do some fighting, and they took massive liberties. The biggest of which is, as far as we know in any historical writings, these two people never actually met in real life. And in the movie, they're the best of friends. So they put them together, made them crazy action heroes. Now, a lot of what you'll see in Indian cinema is they love to reference famous scenes in Hollywood movies. There's huge inspiration that they take from Hollywood movies. So it's like, yeah, there's stuff straight out of Predator. There's stuff straight out of 300. It's like, and yeah, those are like, if you're wondering what type of tone are we striking, those types of tones. There's stuff straight out of The Passion of the Christ, though, as well, which has nothing to do with that happened historically. So what I found most interesting, though, is, okay, we've gone crazy over the top, and it is very fun, and it's very entertaining, and yet I found myself asking some, like, legitimately serious questions, because it was the idea of, okay, we're going to take these people who are known in history and did remarkable things and inspired many, many, many people in real life, and then we're going to depict them metaphorically. It's almost asking the question, like, how do we make people today feel about these men the way people felt about them in 1920? How do we depict that today to sort of show the type of impact that they had on real people's lives in the real world? And it's like, well, it's interesting that the metaphor is to turn them into over-the-top machismo action stars. Like, that's the larger than life type of people that they're, sort of heralded as, but is that the way we should depict them today to get the same feeling? I mean, I just found myself asking a deeper question than I ever expected based upon what people were saying. So I highly recommend checking it out. I kind of wish I had watched it in 4K HDR because it is available with all the highest specs. The CGI is definitely like underfunded and not all of it looks particularly great. But yeah,
well, that's typical of Indian.
It's long. Well. It's just over 3 hours. It is not a short movie.
They don't.
But it also, I will 100% say, most 3-hour movies, I kind of feel at some point like taking a little break, which you can do with a home theater and is really nice. I didn't feel that for 1 second in this. Watched it straight through, never for a moment felt like I wanted to take a break. So it is positive in that light. Check it out.
All right,
RRR.
So my I have some friends from India, and we visit with them quite often, and we talk about cinema, and I've told him that I like Indian cinema, and he's given me recommendations before, and I just hold on a second. All right, close. All right, so one of the recommendations he gave me, not because I've watched it, I've seen it's a 2-part movie, so there's 2 movies and they're not short. It's called Baahubali, Baahubali. There's the beginning and the conclusion. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me because I feel like I'm missing something here.
I was definitely missing a lot in this one too. Yeah, I don't know Indian history very well at all. Right. So this is the same thing. This is kind of based on a like a folk tale, maybe. So everybody who's watching this movie who is Indian has heard this story and they're just seeing it on the screen. Like, I haven't heard it. So it starts off with 3 main characters, and then it flashes back to something in the past, which I don't quite understand, with the same actors playing different characters now who are somehow related to the... I didn't really get it, but it's exactly what you described. It's action, it's over the top, but it has more of a fantasy feel. And there's some really epic fight scenes, and there's dancing, there's singing, there's the whole 9 yards. So it really has a good touch, and it's got good production values for Indian cinema. Yeah,
so
this does as well, for sure.
So that's one. So this week I watched Ms. Marvel, which of course we talked about last week, and I was very excited about. I need to watch it again. I only watched it once with the family, and again, and you know how I kind of feel about that. But we watched it together. If you liked Into the Spider-Verse, remember at the very beginning of the first, like the opening scene of Into the Spider-Verse feels very frenetic to me. It feels kind of like... I
definitely felt that about Ms. Marvel as well, a little bit. Is this what it feels like to have ADHD, maybe? Because I don't, and maybe this is what it feels like to have
That's
ADHD?
exactly what that was exactly my impression.
Right.
It was just like there's too much stuff happening too fast.
Overstimulation.
Yeah. But I felt like she shined very well. I think her friend, whoever his character's name was, her best friend, he did pretty well too. You kind of, with the upcoming Spider-Man movie being, first year or whatever they're calling it, it's like freshman year, right? So it's his college year, I guess.
Right.
His first year in college. So they don't longer have a character who's in high school still.
Right.
And this sort of fills that gap. I mean, I liked it. Clearly, if you're a fan of the character, there's some disappointments here, since she doesn't have the same powers from the same source that she does. They
changed up her powers versus the comic book.
Yeah. In the comic book, she's an Inhuman. For those of you who managed to watch one or more episodes of the Inhumans,
those do exist in the MCU technically. Yeah,
they do.
And
so
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was all about Inhumans as well. So
that's right. And there was that Terrigen bomb that went off, and a bunch of new Inhumans were made and stuff. And she's one of them. But her powers are very much like Mr. Fantastic, where she's all stretchy. But in this, she's not. She's I don't know, energy manipulation or something.
Seems like it's almost a little bit Green Lantern-ish, it seems, from the first episode.
It feels that way. It feels very much like Green Lantern. So we'll see. The first episode I liked. I thought it was engaging and enjoyable. I don't think there was anything in there that wasn't what I expected, and there wasn't anything in there that like totally took me by surprise. So I was I liked it. I was engaged. I thought she was perfectly geeky and exactly of what I expected her to be. So,
on a technical side,
check it out. Yeah,
did you find, like I did, I think it was actually Iman's performance. This is her first sort of big credit that she's had, and I thought she mumbled her words a bit too much. Like her diction was not particularly clear. I don't think that was a pure technical sound mixing thing, because everybody else, their speaking was pretty darn clear. So I just thought, her diction was a little bit tough.
I had technical issues with this show.
Okay.
There was one scene that the audio would cut out for like 20 seconms.
Oh, okay.
And it just I rewound it, because my Xbox does that sometimes.
Yeah.
Like the audio would just cut
that
out. And I completely there was like a scene between her and her brother, after the big fight with her parents, that the audio just cut out. Overall, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I didn't notice that, but I felt overall, just in general, the voices were too soft. Like I had a hard time understanding everybody on this thing.
Yeah, so it wasn't just me then.
No, that the background sounds and music and stuff felt too loud, and I felt like, you could say mumbling, but I would say just like it felt like the voices weren't mixed hot enough.
Okay,
because we were listening to it, at a good volume. I was pumping it up. So, but we'll see what happens with the next episode.
Okay, that's what we watched.
That's what we watched. I really didn't do much this week. My son's starting college. We went to orientation, and I had another son with Nick going to a pole vaulting camp, and I didn't really sit down and watch it. We watched Captain Marvel because we watched Miss Marvel, and we're like, let's watch Captain Marvel again. So that was what we did. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com, find our old episodes. You can see the show notes, the Flickr images, all that stuff. Old episodes, facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant. If you want to contact us directly, it's rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom.
That's it.
We want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Aras again.
Wow. He's not going to have any money to buy that house of his.
I guess not.
Giving it all to us.
Oh.
I have no idea how much he's actually donating each week. Only Tom
It's
sees that
different every
information.
time. It feels
Oh,
like
okay.
I feel it's not a consistent number. I thought this
However many coffees he didn't drink this week. That's
good for him.
I don't know if that's the case. It's just that could be a way to do it. But Aras, thank you very much for the PayPal donation. That's super nice of you. Big time appreciate the financial support.
We also want to thank our 139 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you sign up to become a contributing listener, supporting member of our podcast community. Every month they'll take some money from you, a minimum of $1, give most of it to us. So we want to thank Tom, Dale, and Terry, as well as the other 136 patrons over at patreon.com.
For sure. That is patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 139 patrons, Tom, Dale, and Terry. Thank you for being 3 of them.
Yeah. If you're watching the YouTube, or if I start uncontrollably burping at some point.
You've been drinking the fizzy water.
I have been drinking the fizzy water, but on top of that, it's I cycle in the mornings, most mornings, and it's getting hot. It's like 82 degrees, but feels like 90 something, and
lovely.
I'm very dehydrated by the time I get back. Dale, can't support the podcast financially. Do something.
I mean, he did. He's a patron, but there's additional support from Dale.
But there's additional support here. So let us know what you did so we can mention it. Dale said he didn't have any photos in particular this week, but he wanted me to know that I have permission in perpetuity to use any photos he sends to me or to us at AVRant on AV Gadgets. So thank you, Dale, for that.
That is very nice. Tom is editor-in-chief over at avgadgets.com, uses photos for which he has permission to post them online to help illustrate things in the articles, so that's a big time help. Thank you, Dale. I'll forward whatever photos get sent to question@avrant.com over to Tom.
Speaking of Tom, this is a different Tom, not me, who's a member of our 2 Hour Plus Club. He also listens at he's sending us a note of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Sorry, there's a couple of these here, so I got ahead of myself. So Tom's member of the 2 Hour Plus Club. He listens at 2 times speed, which I don't know how you understand anything we're saying. He had to work his way up to that. He says whenever his family overhears what he's listening to, they ask, what the heck is that? And how do you understand them? My wife says that all the time to me, about me. But now if he listens at 1 time speed, we sound like we're in slow motion and it's awkward. So thanks for doing what we do, he says, or what you do. You're welcome. Dale is also a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club and then some. He appreciates that we include a YouTube version since he isn't into audio only. He's talked his friends' ears off about us, and while he wasn't initially interested in projector info, now one of his friends is putting together a home theater with a projector, and he's listening closely even about projectors. We got a thank you from Kiran, from Terry, another member of our 2 Hour Plus Club, Andrew, another member of our 2 Hour Plus Club, Dan, Kevin, another member of our 2 Hour Plus Club, and he says he's felt so left out not being part of the 2 Hour Plus Club, but now he's in. So I guess we're going to have the 2 Hour Plus Club and the 2 Hour Plus Club. So if you
2 Hour Plus Club Max.
Max. The I too much. I don't know. We have to put an X in there someplace. So something. So if you're a member of the original 2 Hour Plus Club, then you get to be the member of the 2 Hour Plus Club. Though if you know all the ways of being, anyways. Aras says he's very glad that me and my wife are recovering well from COVID. Regarding the Green Knight, which Rob said looked quite dim throughout via streaming, he can assure us that the 4K HDR version on the disc looks incredible.
And I believe that. I have no reason to doubt that. That's exactly the reason why sometimes you still want to get the much better version. So I'll run through the names. Tom, Dale, Kiran, Terry, Andrew, Dan, Kevin, and Aras. Thank you all very, very much for sending in those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We super duper appreciate it. And a big time thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. That's right. All right. In the news, Auro Technologies has filed for bankruptcy, which has got 3 or 4 people very upset. Mm-hmm. They are all online letting you know. They are. They're very loud about it. Yep. What am I going to do about So You Think You Can Dance 3? No, what is it called? What is it called? Dance Revolution 3? Whatever it is. Those are very different things, but sure. Anyways,
This doesn't necessarily mean the end of Auro 3D. Wilfried.
It's Wilfried Van Balen, yeah, as far as I know.
Whatever. There's an I in there. It's
I know. That's how it's spelled.
The founder and CEO has described this as a strategic move since Auro Technologies was spun off as a separate company from his main company, Galaxy Studios, and Galaxy Studios remains unaffected. Furthermore, he intends to fold Auro Technologies' patent portfolio, facilities, and entire staff back into Galaxy Studios and continue to work on the Auro 3D format and content. The pandemic and chip shortage were cited as reasons for the insolvency, as well as new investor funding having fallen through after plans to develop streaming and soundbar versions of Auro 3D had to be put on hold. The last thing this world needs is more damn soundbars. I'm sorry. I'm just sorry. I'm sorry I could care less about this, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people going, okay, good that like not everything is like completely going under. It seems like Auro 3D is kind of going to get folded back into Galaxy Studios, but I'm also like, okay, well the flip side is obviously they had debt, right. and declaring bankruptcy means you're not paying those debts. Right. I mean, the idea is, okay, you do that, and future investors are going to think twice before they invest with you again. That might be true, which might make the future at Galaxy Studios a little bit more challenging. Some people might be like, I don't know if I want to invest in another Wilfried Van Balen company because the last time I didn't get what I was owed paid back to me. But I mean, on the other side of it is like, aren't you kind of leaving some people high and dry? Like there was some stuff that was owed by Auro Technologies that, they're just not paying those bills, which, I mean, you have to do if you're bankrupt. I mean, I get it. This happens all the time. That's the whole idea of spinning off a subsidiary or a separate company to handle one particular thing of your business because you don't want it to affect your main business. That I understand that, but it all feels a little bit icky. I'm not super happy about any of this. So, yeah. Anyway, that's it. Auro Technologies is gone, but Auro 3D, the format, lives on.
Yeah. I would say that it lives on in the way that, somebody in a coma or maybe a zombie lives on. It's just shambling around.
Zombie Auro, yep.
Yeah, it's not long for this world. Insteon hub owners who left their hubs plugged in even after Insteon shut down without a word of warning 2 months ago got a surprise last week when their red hub lights turned green and Insteon seemingly sprang back to life again without a word of warning. Also, took over your toaster and is trying to kill you. I'm sorry.
It's zombie Insteon.
Turns out the former VP of Smart Labs, Ken Fairbanks, who thankfully has an easier last name to say than many other people, along with a group of passionate Insteon users, acquired Insteon's assets and are working to bring it back under their new company, Insteon Technologies LLC. Mm-hmm. Ken said in a statement that the new owner's goal was to get Insteon services back online as quickly as possible, even before they had gained access to Insteon's website and social media accounts, which is why the servers came back to life without any warning or hype. In an attempt to keep Insteon financially viable, Insteon services will now have an annual $40 subscription fee. Also, they're going to continue this trend of just doing things and not letting you know.
Well, apparently not. Apparently they're being much more communicative now that they do have access to the Insteon website and the social media accounts. That is, in fact, how they inform people that there will be this $40 annual subscription fee going forward. They're letting people sign up for 2 years in advance at $70 for a $10 savings. I guess you're taking a little bit of risk because these are brand new owners taking over a company that went insolvent without any warning, and you're putting your faith that they will continue for at least 2 years if you're buying 2 years in advance. So
$70 is not a huge investment, though.
No, clearly there are many Insteon Hub users who, for the past 2 months, have said, "Okay, well, done with that, moving on to something else." But some people continued to wanted to use it, or certainly many people still had their Insteon devices because there were other ways of still using the devices, even with Insteon's own servers having been shut down for the past 2 months. So, yeah, I mean, happy for those who got something back without, having to completely redo everything. Maybe they just waited. Happy for those who continued to want to use their Insteon hub the way they were using it, and that's okay. Yeah, we'll see how it goes, but I will be hesitant to recommend Insteon as the first thing to buy. That seems a little bit iffy. Good luck.
Right. So after Microsoft recently pivoted away from releasing an Xbox Cloud gaming stick for streaming games on any TV, they've now announced that starting June 30th, 2022, and only 2022, Samsung TVs will get an Xbox app for streaming Xbox Cloud gaming titles directly to their TVs. It will be limited 1080p SDR at 60 frames per second. No Dolby Atmos either. So yeah, it's all going to be in DTS, which...
just be Dolby.
Samsung's can't do.
Dolby Digital 5.1. That's what it'll be. So
any Bluetooth controllers that already work on Samsung TVs, including PlayStation controllers, will work. And Microsoft says their intent is to explore other TV partnerships as well.
So there it is, Xbox Cloud Gaming. I mean, we've had it on mobile devices. That has been a way to do Xbox Cloud Gaming on something other than an Xbox console. But yeah, coming directly to an app built into 2022 Samsung TVs. No prior model years. It has to be the Tizen 6.5, and they never update the Tizen operating system on previous models. They just keep iterating on that year after year. Yeah, we'll see if it comes to other brands besides Samsung. They are sort of Xbox's official television partner, so it makes sense that they came there first. But yes, the Xbox Cloud Gaming streaming games will be limited at first, at least, to 1080p SDR, 60 frames per second. No Dolby Atmos, so it's not the highest quality that you could get from an Xbox game, but you can do it without owning an Xbox console. There you go.
There you go. Comments here from our listeners. Nathan says he enjoyed our discussion about house curves and ideally trying to match whatever equalization that was used while making the content in order to hear exactly what the content creators were hearing themselves. So along those lines, he wanted to share some resources that go into great detail regarding the room setup. First is Dolby Professional's technical guidelines for a Dolby Atmos home entertainment studios. It goes into, let's say, excruciating detail, since I don't want to say great again, including diagrams for the design of the room itself and then the placement and capabilities of the speakers, but it is all in reference to a single listener at the mixed position. Some of the topics that we frequently get asked about on this podcast are addressed. They note acceptable elevation for surround and surround back speakers, up to 20-degree elevation for an angle for surrounds, and up to 25-degree elevation angles for surround backs. They describe side surround arrays using multiple speakers to all play a single surround channel, and they spell out that this is a quote, the mixed position should be well within the dispersion of the speaker and the speaker tilt applied if this is not the case. Ideally, all speakers should be aimed directly at the mixed position, which is what Dolby, that's the end of quote. That's what Dolby does on their diagrams, and
but many people only pay attention to that second part, the ideally part, and I'm not going to dispute. They say it right there in black and white, ideally, but let's not ignore the first part, which is the mixed position should be well within the dispersion of the speaker, which is what I always really come back to, because I'm not terribly worried about aiming my speakers directly at the main listening position. I do care about the cone of dispersion out of any given speaker and having all of my seats within that cone of dispersion. We're going to touch upon that again in just a moment.
So things get interesting as they touch upon speaker EQ and point to their own Dolby Audio Room Design Tool, which is an Excel spreadsheet program for guidance on RT60 times, which is
reverberation time, how long it takes to get 60 decibels quieter than the initial impulse.
That's right. Regarding speaker EQ, the only specific standard mentioned is to use the modified X curve from SMPTE, but only for rooms larger than 4,400 cubic feet. We'll actually be getting to some recommendations for room curves during our first question this week, so stay tuned for that. Rob dug into that Dolby Audio Room Design Tool and tried a few different example room sizes when it comes to Dolby guidance on RT60 times. They give a range with an upper and lower acceptable limit, plus a recommended decay time curve that falls in the middle. They specify decay time values each octave between 125 hertz and 8 kilohertz. Allowable decay times are longer for larger rooms and shorter for smaller rooms, but they are generally aiming for around 200-300 milliseconds RT60 throughout the mid-range and lower treble, with a rise in decay times into the bass and a slight decrease in decay times for the upper treble, which is kind of what we always say here anyways.
Quite expected. Nothing shocking about any of that, yes?
However, it's interesting to note the lowest acceptable limit, which can dip below 100 milliseconds, and really looks like decay time curves we would expect if you were to basically cover the entire room in nothing but absorption. That isn't the recommendation, but it is acceptable, which means if, I mean, no one does this. no one.
No, but it's just
no
that
one does this.
You and I have talked about potentially using absorption only, not worrying about having super uniform flat decay times across basically the entire frequency range, everything above the base, which would necessitate measuring and quite possibly deploying some diffusion or diffusion and absorption combination to make sure that everything falls like right in that 200 to 300 millisecond zone, regardless of frequency. We've said, okay, yeah, you can just do absorption only, but when you do, what you'll end up with is a tilt. You'll see a general tilt with shortening decay times as you go higher and higher in frequency. We've talked about that. So right here are examples right in Dolby's own diagrams where it's like they didn't actually say in there, yeah, this is what would happen if you do absorption only, but we can surmise that it's like, yeah, that's what you do. That's exactly what we would expect to see. That is that green lower limit in these diagrams. Yes, the purple line in there, that's their recommendation. It clearly falls within the upper and lower limit. But that lower limit is what we would expect to see if you just did nothing but absorption only, and a heck of a lot of it, to be frank, with the curve that's been showing there. That's why it's like basically covering the entire room in nothing but absorption. So while it isn't their recommendation, they're like, it is acceptable. And so the people who've criticized us for making that recommendation, we like to make that recommendation because it tends to cost less and be simpler, and it's not so worrisome in exactly how you deploy it. It's kind of like, yeah, you get a bunch of insulation, you put it at a few key points, and you're going to be okay. While Dolby would not say this is our top recommendation, they would agree you will be okay, at least according to this tool. So I think there's less disagreement than some people might have initially believed.
Is this the same person?
Same person,
Nathan. Yeah. Let's say, so Nathan also provided a link to Trinnov's speaker layout guide. While their reasoning is clearly laid out, it reads a bit more like an opinion piece. We think there is an overemphasis placed on the importance of Auro 3D. More so, considering they just went out of business.
Yes, indeed.
It leads to some unusual recommendations as they attempt to describe a speaker layout that will work for all three immersive audio formats. If you take Auro 3D out of the mix, basically, you don't have to worry about, but all the speakers are supposed to be in the same spot anyway. So Auro 3D is the only one that has speakers in different spots. So now that they're dead, I'm sorry, they are. Just get over it, people. For example, they attempt to adhere to Dolby's basic premise that the two rows of overhead speakers should be the same width apart as your front left and right speakers and your surround back speakers. But then they mentioned wanting to have the overhead speakers in the middle, very close to the side walls, so they more closely adhere to Auro 3D's surround height positions. This leads to suggesting that the side walls be only 1 foot away from the front left and right speakers, with all of your overhead speakers only 1 foot away from the side walls. And they repeatedly write a lot about angling and aiming speakers, going into great detail, and yet we think it can all be summed up with the single sentence that they include just before the conclusion of the full write-up. The goal should be to have each speaker's best sound aimed to into the listening area. So, yeah, okay, whatever. Thank you, Trinnov. You guys are nailing it over there. Whoever wrote that with a glass of whiskey next to them shouldn't have finished the bottle by the time they got to the end.
None of it is bad information. Quite honestly, if you follow all of it, I'm going to be very happy with what you end up with. Other than,
unless your room is really wide.
Well, that was super confusing. Like your front, left, and right speakers should be within 1 foot of the side walls, just so that you can have these two lines of overhead speakers also be close to the side walls. Only because we're worried about Auro 3D. I would recommend ignoring that advice, mainly because if you want to do it from a technical reason, if you look at Dolby's spec for Atmos, they say that your pairs of overhead speakers, your left and right overhead speakers, whatever tops or heights or middles they might be, they spell it right out. They should be 1/2 to 3/4 of the width of your room apart. So, if your room is 16 feet wide, your left and right overhead speakers should be at least 8 feet wide, up to 12 feet apart. That's how far apart they should be. So if you follow all of those things and say that they're going to be 3/4 of the room's width apart, but only 1 foot away from the side walls, that means your room is 8 feet wide. That's the only way that would work, and you'd be within both the Trinnov recommendation and the Dolby spec, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, especially since they're also like the minimum height of your room should be 3 meters, around 10 feet. So I'm like, so you're gonna have an 8-foot wide and 10-foot tall room, eh? That's what we're going for. This is the ideal. They almost always showed 3 rows of seats because Trinnov tends to go into larger theater installments. So I'm like, so it's gonna be one recliner, but 3 of them in front of each other. That's going to be your seating arrangement. That's about as wide as you can go with an 8-foot wide.
It's kind of like watching in a very large shoebox.
At which point, yes, aiming your speakers at the seats won't be too difficult when you only have one strip of seats down the middle. So I'm poking fun because clearly that is not what any of their diagrams or the language actually says, except that they spell out speakers 1 foot away from the sidewalls, which I absolutely would not do. That in a normal size theater, that's going to put your overhead speakers way too wide apart.
Yeah.
I say, Dolby's spec is really clear. 1/2 to 3/4 of the room's width apart, and that's going to be too wide apart if they're 1 foot away from the side walls. So, some contradiction in there. But like I say, if you read through the thing and you take the sort of general things about it, they talk about elevating your surround and surround back speakers so that you don't have, they use the word occlusion, right? You don't have occlusion from other people's heads from the speaker to your head in any given seat. They talk about something that I like to mention that isn't often considered, which is potentially cross-firing your speakers. This is like when we talk about toe-in, this would be super duper heavy toe-in so that it's actually like the right speaker is aimed at the left seat and the left speaker is aimed at the right seat, so that if there were like laser beams coming out of the tweeters of the speakers, they would cross in front of the listening position. Really, really heavy toe-in. But they talk about why that might be beneficial, and I like to see that because that's something I talk about sometimes. It's something to be experimented with, but ultimately there is this sort of like, because people always want to aim their speakers, and now they're going to point at these Dolby and Trinnov things that we're going to link to and say, hey, look, both of them say ideally aim your speakers directly at the main listening position. I can't dispute that. It's right there in black and white, and they both use the word ideally. But I will still come back to both of them also say the goal is have the seats, the whole listening area within the dispersion of the speakers. And that's my main criteria. I'm not super worried about exactly where it's aiming. I just want to figure out what the dispersion of the speaker is and have all the seats that I care about within that dispersion cone. And there is no disagreement amongst any of us about doing it that way. So I think that's about it. Question time. Woo!
Wait a second. This is loudspeaker. Okay. You said it says they call it crossfire?
Yeah, cross-firing.
It's not showing up when I search that document. All right, I'll find out later. Where's the questions? There they are. All right. Scrolling back. Max. First question today is Max. Max wrote this a while back several times with his finished attic space for his house, for his home theater. We convinced him to add a door. That sounds like us. And once the door was added, we convinced him that the SVS PB12 NSD was perfectly fine in terms of output. So we added a PB2000 during one of SVS's outlet store sales. And now he's doing all the dual subwoofer things, getting Room EQ Wizard and the mini DSPs and all of that. He didn't take new pictures of the room. Okay, so those of you that don't know, this is like a bonus room or something. It's upstairs, got a slanted ceiling. So he needs to do all the weird, the Room EQ Wizard and mini DSP. Because he can't just...
This is not a rectangle.
Yeah, it's not a rectangle. He didn't take new pictures of the room since adding the second sub, so it's on the left wall across the room from his first sub, which is on the right wall. He followed a few different YouTube tutorials for optimizing his dual subs, and now he has a bunch of questions.
Would you ever? If you're just trying to follow everything that's on YouTube, you would definitely end up with questions, yes.
You will end up with some very strange recommendations. He isn't using Audyssey's sub EQHT anymore, but if you go with the way it sets up dual subs, it has you adjust the volume separately on each sub, and then it also level matches them via independent trim levels. In Rob's 12-step guide, he talks about level matching the subs if you notice an obvious imbalance, but the guides he followed said to gain match the subs, not level match them, and that made sense to him since it would mean both subs would have the same headroom available prior to EQ. Not really sure what that has to do with anything, but here we go. So can we explain why either level matching or gain matching would be better? Does it really even matter in his setup? So, okay, Rob's 12-step guide assumes that you have a microphone and SPL meter, or SPL meter. Or,
well, just an SPL meter, really, yeah. I attempted to do it as something that you wouldn't need Room EQ Wizard for. That was the point of my 12-step guide, but I do have the use of an SPL meter there. If you need it, I actually amended that guide after we talked to Todd Welty, because I agree with Todd Welty's approach, which is you start with them gain matched. You start with the volume dials on the two subwoofers if they're identical subwoofers, and yours actually aren't, because one is a PB12 NSD and one is a PB2000. Those are exceedingly close to one another,
right,
but they are not literally identical. So actually gain matching them would be, complicated to the point that it totally isn't worth it in your instance. But the idea of gain matching the subs if you had identical subs, that is the starting point. I definitely would have that as the starting point. I only then say there are the instances where theory does not always match reality, because our rooms, even if they're perfect rectangles, are not necessarily completely acoustically symmetrical. Maybe, right, somebody put a little bit more plaster on one of these walls than the other, and there's a slight acoustical imbalance that you wouldn't immediately notice, or most rooms have at least one door to get in, and so it isn't literally perfectly symmetrical in every single way. So once I always come back to the actual listening. You sit in your seat, and in fact, you sit across your entire couch, and you listen to the bass sweeps play, and sometimes you go, yeah, I did everything by the theory. I had them gain matched, and I sent them a mono signal, but I can just tell that there's a sub on my left, and I just hear the imbalance when I play the sweep. That's when I say, okay, let's go back and level match the subs, because that usually fixes that. Once you level match the subs, now that you've done all the other steps, that fixes that, and you no longer have this, everything gets pulled to one side or the other, or you can tell that one sub's at the front of your room or at the back of the room, or that type of thing.
See, I guess for my thought process, and I'm not disagreeing with Todd or you, but my thought process is, if you just start by level matching the subs in general, like if you just do that, then the gain, if they are sort of even, if the room basically affects them evenly and they're about the same distance from you, which they mostly are in most of these cases, they're going to end up being gain matched anyways.
The argument there, though, is that you can have the instances where if you level match first, one of the subs has a big old dip that the other one doesn't when you're playing them individually.
I understand.
So you end up artificially boosting that sub, because when you're playing pink noise, it's not as though you're going to notice that there's a particular frequency with a big dip, but the overall measurement on your sound pressure meter will be lower because of this big dip that one sub has than the other doesn't. So you could artificially, when you're level matching first, end up with them in balance.
But then you end up with the exact same thing, right?
You end up the end result you have to adjust afterwards based on hearing it, not just the theory of the numbers.
So if you start off with level matching, you may end up with one sub that's louder than the other because of the room. Or if you start off with gain matching, you may end up with one sub that's louder than the other because of the room. So it really doesn't matter which way you start.
Yes, and it does matter to come back and play the sweep at the end and trust your ears about it, because the microphone isn't going to be able to tell you something like that. It doesn't tell you what your perception of it is going to end up being. So this is the roundabout way of saying, particularly in Max's room, I am not concerned which method he goes for, gain matching or level matching as the starting point, because we look at his room, he's got a sub on his left wall, the middle of his left wall essentially, and the middle of his right wall essentially. I mean, it's not a perfect rectangle, so it's not exactly the middle, but more or less they're in the middle of the two side walls. His seats are centered in the room. He's got two subwoofers in the PB12 NSD and the PB2000 that are both more than capable of pressurizing this room individually. So you're not going to run into a situation where by either approach, you end up reaching the limits of one sub and not the other. That's the real only concern. The only concern is, do we have a mismatched enough situation, either because of very different subs or very different placement, that we reach the limit of one sub and not the other? That's the only concern. And I have zero concern about that in this setup. I don't really foresee any circumstance where you would end up with that type of mismatch. So I would say kind of plunk your subs down. I would do a very basic, whether it's from Audyssey, just, get them into the green zone and really not be too concerned if they're perfectly level or gain matched. You're going to be well within the ballpark either way.
Yeah. I think I just found the Crossfire thing, but it doesn't say Crossfire on here.
Tom's interested.
I am interested to see what they say. Yeah, and if you go to AV Gadgets, we'll have a link to it. The setting up dual subwoofers. I talk about how to level match them using only Audyssey.
Sure.
So there you go. His playback volume can change depending on what he's listening to and when. So he would like to continue using Audyssey Dynamic EQ, but he wants to use his mini DSP to achieve the best dual sub optimization, and he also wants to apply the Harman room curve. I think he means the curves of equal loudness is what I think he means.
Well, no, two separate things. He wants curves of equal loudness, which would be supplied by Audyssey Dynamic EQ, and he wants a room curve, the Harman or the Sean Olive and Todd Welty recommended response curve. So, yeah, he's like, is there a template for that? And I'll have a resource for you, which goes into some other things that we'll talk about within this question.
So yeah, should he use the mini DSP to achieve uniform or flat response first and then use the Audyssey Editor app to target the Harman room curve, or should he curtain off Audyssey so it doesn't touch the bass and then use mini DSP to EQ everything for the subs? Would he still be able to use dynamic EQ if he does that? You should do the first thing.
Yes, the first approach. Yeah,
use the mini DSP to get as flat as you can so that Audyssey can do the tweaking, and it'll be able to do that very, very well.
In fact, with the
it might not even do anything.
With the mini DSP, all I'm really concerned about is getting uniformity. I don't even care if after the mini DSP adjustments it's linear. I just want it uniform across all three seats with no gigantic suck out anywhere. That to me is the real benefit and goal of using the mini DSP to make your adjustments. Now, if you have subwoofers that have enough adjustments already built in, you might not even need a mini DSP. If they can have fully variable phase, maybe a couple of EQ bands that are built into them, and then, of course, they've got gain adjustment. You can often do this without a mini DSP. Now, he's got a PB12 NSD as one of his subs, so that doesn't have all of those capabilities built in. It certainly doesn't have the EQs built into the model going back there. So the mini DSP can certainly be of use here, but what we want to do is we're going to send a single subwoofer signal from the AV receiver to the mini DSP. The mini DSP is then going to feed the two subwoofers, and we're going to adjust the output of each of those two feeds until we get primarily just worrying about uniform bass response across the seats. Then we're going to use the Audyssey Editor app to form our target curve. That's where we put in the target curve. Run Audyssey, let it do its thing. Because we have uniformity across our seats, it's going to be able to EQ that subwoofer output really easily, because you're going to position your microphone in at least 3 positions across your couch, and it's going to say, hey, every time I measured this, I got the same response back. So yeah, I can EQ this to my heart's content. It's not going to be where I boost the frequency in one seat and it gets worse in a different seat. If I boost the frequency in one seat, it's going to boost it in all the seats. If I cut it in one seat, it's going to cut it in all the seats, and it's going to do a fabulous job of EQing. So that's certainly the approach. Care about getting uniformity with the mini DSP, then let Audyssey do its thing and use the editor app to apply the room curve if you don't want to use the default Audyssey curve. So the resource I'm going to point you to, it's Dr. Floyd Tools, The Measurement and Calibration of Sound Reproducing Systems. This is an Audio Engineering Society article, but it is freely open. This is not one you have to pay for or do the AES subscription to access. It is completely unlocked and open for anyone to peruse. It is long and it is dense, and if you are not into this stuff, it could be very confusing. But I wanted to run through a few things here because we already talked about Nathan's comment and getting into some of this room curve stuff with Dolby's recommendations, and this touches upon all of that. So I thought this was a good opportunity to go through some of this stuff because we are getting quite a few questions about this as of late, and it's a topic that, there is, I'm going to warn you, there's not going to be a hard and fast right or wrong. It's just this is the research, this is some of the recommendations, and I think there actually is a fair amount of agreement and consensus. So this is just pulling some of the graphs that are in that Floyd Toole article, and it's just pointing out if we measure a speaker that is anechoically flat on axis, and there's pretty wide consensus now that, yeah, that's what we want out of a speaker. Tell it like it is when there's no room involved. Just play the speaker play the signal as the signal was sent to the speaker. That seems like a pretty intuitive way to design a speaker. So starting with that, and then bringing that into, and they quite often use this phrase, right? What do we call a typically reflective room? That phrase is used quite often, a typically reflective room. And they also talk about a very deadened theater or a highly reflective room. So that second set of graphs is basically just showing, okay, we bring that anechoically flat speaker into a subset of rooms. In the completely dead room, it comes out pretty darn flat, like we would expect. That's what the dead room is. It's getting close to the anechoic chamber. If it measured flat in the anechoic chamber, it's going to measure pretty close to flat in the acoustically dead room. But in a typically reflective room, it's got this sort of general tilt that we've talked about. And it's more like from the mid-range, if the mid-range is set as the 0 point, like 1 kilohertz is set at the 0 point, then the deep bass will be about 6 decibels louder once we get down to 20 hertz, and the high treble will be about 6 decibels quieter once we get up to 20 kilohertz. So it's this overall tilt, sort of centered in that mid-range with about a 6 dB boost at the very bottom and about a 6 dB drop at the very, very top. And that's sort of what we see there. Then they get into, okay, what are the recommendations based on listener feedback? Because Harman's done a ton of research, bringing in lots and lots of listeners to their test facility using, their JBL professional speakers and other speakers. And they basically came up with this steady state room curve. And now that word, steady state, is super important. Steady state is the way that X curve that was mentioned by Dolby is measured. That is full band pink noise, and a very specific pink noise, full band just played continuously and then measured with a real-time analyzer, or in more modern times, maybe a fast Fourier transform. But the point is, it is not a sweep, and it is not an impulse. It is constant full band pink noise being played. And what do we expect to then see when we measure that? And that's where they came up with this general rise in the bass, getting close to like a 10 decibel rise in the bass rather than just the gradual tilt. Very, very flat mid-range, and then this gradual roll off in the treble. That's actually pretty close to that, about 6 decibels down by the time you get to 20 kilohertz. So based on listeners, that's what sort of came back to it. They have the example of the modified X curve, exactly what Dolby talked about. So if you want to see the graph of what that modified X curve is, it's flat until the treble. It's flat until the treble, where it rolls off in the treble, and it doesn't roll off as steeply as the original X curve. But other than that, it's flat. And like Dolby said, it's meant for quite large, heavily treated rooms, where they're expecting that if you were listening to near field speakers that just played completely flat, what would they sound like if you then put them into a larger damped room? And it would mean the high frequencies roll off. Nothing surprising about that. So after that, we finally get to some this is, again, subjectively preferred. What's really important in the graph that I'm showing on YouTube, or if you're following along in the Flickr album, is the gray area. That is the sort of range of where everybody fell. And it's not like worlds apart in anything. It's like a plus minus 5 decibel range as far as the bass goes, and then essentially flat throughout the rest of it. So again, if we're looking at like what is subjectively preferred, this was going into untrained listeners versus trained listeners and things like that. It goes into full detail there. The last graph I want to focus on, I left it as is. Because within this graph, as the thick dotted line, is that olive welty target. So if you want to sort of isolate that and use that as your target when you're inputting into your Audyssey editor app, okay, that's the one it is. It's the thick dashed line mentioned in this as the olive welty target, which is what we talked about. Very, very flat across the mid-range, a gentle roll-off in the treble, close to a 10 decibel boost, gradually going down into the deep bass. But these other lines that are overlaid on here are other targets. other targets that are published and out there, and some people use them. So the reason I wanted to leave the graph as is to say we don't have a full consensus. There isn't a single answer to this. There are, in fact, other standards out there that are used by certain recording studios. So we don't have a hard
Clark
and fast...
target is hilarious, man. It's 20,
sure.
20 dB. Well, it's not quite 20 dB, but...
Oh, that's a huge rise in the bass down to 20 hertz.
Rise in the bass. Yeah, then
Massive.
it cuts off minus 10 dB on the treble too, so it's very, very mid-range forward.
Yeah, so within there we do have the olive welty target. That is the shorthanded as the Harman target. That's what used. But importantly, this is steady state. This is not the sweep response. This is the full band pink noise just being played continuously and then measured with an RTA or an FFT. So you have to do a little bit of back and forth there too, because to really get the result that they're recommending, we don't just input that target curve to Audyssey editor app and just say, okay, that's guaranteed to be it. We need to go back at the end of the process, measure with the full band steady state pink noise, pull out our audio tools on our smartphone and measure with the RTA or the FFT and see if we actually got this curve in response to a steady state response, because the steady state response includes the reverberation of the room, right? So again, we're tying it all together. We go back to that Dolby room planning tool, and we look at those high and low limits of how your decay times might be and how maybe it rises in the bass, maybe it doesn't rise that much. Maybe you've treated your room with lots and lots of absorption and only that, and you already have this decay time in the treble that's going to result in those decay times that's going to result in the steady state response being this treble roll off, even if the frequency response direct out of the speaker is a flat line. So we can't ignore, no surprise listening to this podcast, we can't ignore the influence of the room on the final result. And these steady state curves are taking that into effect. They're saying, we can't just say, here is the frequency response target that should come out of your speaker, because once it leaves the speaker, the room has an influence on it. And we have to think about that too, which is why they use the steady state. So a lot to digest there. If that all went over your head, maybe, listen through this section a couple of times. Definitely go and read, if you can stomach how long and thorough it is, read the entire article because it's freely available. And if this has been troubling you, you've been worrying about it, what exactly should my room curve be? If you go through all that, you might not feel confident because it is a lot to chew on, but you will have all the information I have, and then I guess you can draw your own conclusions.
Right. I think the takeaway is you can't just throw that curve in there and say you're done.
Indeed.
It takes a lot more work than that, so maybe just don't. Don't do any of that.
Yeah.
Just get your
we should emphasize we were going to anyway, but neither Tom or I gets this worried about it.
No.
We really don't, and I'll say what I do once we get to the end of these.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll save it for then, too, because I do even less than you, I'm sure.
Yep.
He was thinking he might try the multi-sub optimizer software to see if he can get even better results with that. What do we think? I'm pretty sure that's only for three or more subs, so I don't really think it's worth it. But anyways,
Indeed.
He's included graphs on his current measurements with the center, left, and right couch sees just the bass with the Audyssey on versus off. And note this was with dynamic EQ on and the master volume set below reference volume, so dynamic EQ is having an effect.
And it appears it was only at -5, just looking at what the responses were.
Right.
Because we're definitely seeing a 5 decibel boost in the bass, which is what we would expect if you had your master volume set to -5. So, if we're looking at his bass response, if you took the left seat, the right seat, and the center, and you overlaid those graphs, they don't completely 100% overlap.
No.
There's a little bit of a dip in the left seat towards sort of the 60 hertz area. In the right seat, there's a bit of a dip just below 40 hertz. But none of them are egregious. Those are not nulls. Those are not full-on cancellation nulls. There is cancellation going on there. That's why we have the dips in those seats. But it's not full-on nulls. And again, the entire thing is within, a ±5 dB window. At his center seat, it's basically a flat line.
I know, right? Center seat looks really good. I would sit there.
It looks really good, yeah. Yes. That would be the chosen seat. But the other two seats are not bad by any means. So, yes, as Tom said, the multi-sub optimizer, it will function with only 2 subs, but it isn't really intended for only 2 subs. It's really meant for 3 or 4. So I wouldn't necessarily send you down that rabbit hole. What I would, because I mean, obviously he enjoys doing this, right? He's putting the time in, doing the measurements. This is part of the hobby and the enjoyment for him. So what I would focus on is, I think he's maybe followed some of the tutorials that focus on trying to achieve linearity with the mini DSP. Because definitely I've seen some of the tutorials that do that. And he has essentially done that in the center seat, right? That's why I have that suspicion that he was following the tutorials that are aiming for linearity straight out of the mini DSP. I would recommend to you, worry less about linearity, worry more about uniformity. Because you can, through trial and error, because that's all it is, achieve closer to uniformity across all of your seats. Not necessarily linearity, but if you get that uniformity, then Audyssey can do a fantastic job.
Okay. Oh, wait. I need to scroll back down again. He has bass shakers and is feeding their amplification from the mini DSP as recommended. So how does he actually make the filter to counteract the Audyssey EQ being sent to from the subwoofer output of his receiver so that the bass shakers just get a flat, uneq'd signal? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is the fun part of having bass shakers. And
I'm going to warn you right now, it's going to be a bit approximate. It's going to be approximate.
And I would hazard a guess that now that you have a door, you don't need them anymore. You know, you have 2 subwoofers and you have a door.
Right.
And now your couch will shake all by itself without having bass shakers attached.
We've seen he can get very linear to below 20 hertz with plenty of output. You can see that. You can convince yourself, Max, if you didn't believe it. It's right there in your graphs.
Yeah, it exists.
But assuming he does, I mean, like I say, the easy way, and it will be approximate, so don't fret too much about it, is in the Audyssey editor app, it shows you the correction curve. It shows you the target curve. You can ignore the after curve because that is not a measured result. That's just its predicted result, but it does show you the correction curve that has been applied to try and get the measured curve to match the target curve. So there is the correction curve. So just look at the correction curve for the subwoofer output and then flip that upside down. That's what you're going to need to do, and input that as your target curve for the output of the mini DSP that is feeding your bass shakers. You want the inverse, the upside down version of the correction curve that the Audyssey editor app shows you for your subwoofers.
And that's about as far as I would go.
And it can be approximate. It does not have to be perfect. It's just that there's going to be some boosts and some cuts, and you want the inverse of that at the same frequencies, and you can glean that just from what the Audyssey editor app shows you for the correction curves. Yeah.
If you're 1 or 2 dB off here or there, it's not going to be that big of a difference.
Yeah, these are bass shakers. It's going to be fine. Yeah.
And then I would turn them off and sell them. Okay. After you listen, let's talk about elevating surround speakers enough to give them a clear line of sight to every seat. He experimented for himself and discovered that he agrees. It's so weird. It's almost like I've been talking about this. But I love this. I mean,
years. Like, he is not taking our word as gospel whatsoever. He's looking at tons of different things. Then he's like, well, I got myself to the point that I'm confused. Let's go back to Tom and Rob and see if they can sort it out for me.
So he now wants to raise his surround speakers about 6 inches. He's got Santa's speaker stands that he likes and would like to continue to use. They are filled with sand and are nice and stable so his kids can't accidentally knock them over. He used some adjustable stands temporarily to experiment, but they're so wobbly he doesn't want to use them permanently. He found some Dayton monitor stands. Could he somehow screw those into the bottom of his Santa stands to add 6 inches of height that he wants? Where there's a impact driver, there's a way, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure, but I would do a much cheaper and simpler thing than this, because those Dayton stands, the base of them is not as large as the base of the Santa stand. So there is are
they really smaller?
There is like a flat section that you can't quite see in the Santa stands, like, because it's kind of curved when you're looking at the outside, but there is a flat section within, and theoretically it would be possible to secure that flat section to those Dayton stands, but I would just get some cinder blocks. I would get some cinder blocks, cover them with some black fabric, and I would stand the Santa stands on top of the cinder blocks. That is 100% the approach that I would take on this. I would
also
buy anything
get those
fancy
carpet spikes off of your stands as well. I don't know why those are on there. I literally throw those away.
Well, maybe for stability. Maybe he was so worried about stability.
Nah, I'm worried about
stability. Yeah, I would do some cinder blocks covered with some black fabric. That's all I would do.
And if you don't want to do cinder blocks, if you've got some sort of allergy to it, you could just build a wooden box and then put that underneath it.
I mean, anything heavy and stable, I would just do that. Yeah. Bricks.
Put it at the bottom; it'll be fine. And then if you again with the Santas, I think that because he's got the same ones I have. Those are plastic little jobbies at the bottom, but they have a threaded insert, for your speaker spikes. So there's no reason why you couldn't get a screw and just screw up, the bottom of your box or bottom of your whatever you're gonna through whatever you put underneath there into the stand, so it becomes part of the sand, and then fill that with sand or something like that. So we previously said. Oh, so okay. We told him previously that he should acoustically treat the angled part of his ceiling that was directly above his seats, so he did that. Now he has moved his couch forward as to compare to what's shown in the photos, and he was trying to use the mirror trick to find the first reflection points on his ceiling, but there are so many weird angles that he doesn't end up seeing his speakers in the mirror from some of his seated positions. Does that mean the first reflection points are no big deal in those cases, or do we have recommendations for where his acoustic panels should be moved now that his seats are farther forward? Man, I wouldn't move those things if you paid me. This is, one of, and because I think before his couch was like, so that the roof was right above.
In the photos that he sent before, that's what it is. The seat is pushed pretty close to the back of the room, and the angled part of the ceiling and this sort of notch that's cut out of it for the window in that angled part, that's all directly above his head. Now he's pulled his seats a bit more forward. That we're not really worried about exact first reflections, and the mirror trick would be very difficult with a multi-angled ceiling. That isn't what we're worried about. What we're worried about is sounds just bouncing around in that alcove above your head, that angled cutout section above your head. We don't just want uncontrolled reflections bouncing around up there, because that's all hard, flat reflective surface otherwise, and they will. They'll just bounce around up there. So honestly, my recommendation is don't worry about the first reflection aspect of it, but I might add some more, because he might have since these photos, but he's only got a couple of looks like 2 foot by 2 foot panels up there in sort of the angle of his ceiling, and I would add some more treatment in that angled alcove if you can, particularly on the sides of that alcove. I would add some more if you're able to, because we just want to reduce the reflecting of sound around in that weird angled part of the ceiling.
And Dolby says you can
treat the whole darn room if you want to. Yeah.
I actually wrote an article. I guess I can't find it, so I must not have published it yet. But I wrote an article about what to do if you have a room that has super wide walls. If the walls are really so far away that your first reflection points are actually behind you. And this is like that same situation where it's like, yeah, I know that the first reflection points or what we say, everybody says, are the most important one, and they are important. They're not important, but just because it's behind you doesn't mean that you don't have to treat the wall right next to you, because you're still trying to catch all those.
It's the ratio of direct to reflected sound. Yeah. That's what we're trying to get. More direct sound to your ear versus reflected sound. That's the simplified way of understanding it.
So he basically filled the whole nook behind his couch with 3 packages of safe and sound insulation covered by some black fabric. Then he also bought some used full round tube traps, which are 2 9-inch diameter tubes at 3 feet tall, and 2 9-inch diameter tubes at 2 feet tall, and 2 11-inch diameter tubes at 2 feet tall. I have no idea what any of this means. They're just tubes full of insulation. Is that what it is?
They are tubes of insulation, and they also have sort of one face that's reflective when I looked up what they are.
All right. Yeah. The webpage shows that they can absorb a lot more bass at their most absorptive frequency of 400 hertz. I guess that's useful. And with the 9-inch tubes being very effective down to 110, and the 11-inch tubes being down to 90. He might experiment by placing them in various positions around his room and measuring with room EQ wizard to see what they do, but he wanted to ask if putting some of these tubes beside his front tower speakers will help for treating SBIR, speaker boundary interference response. He doesn't want to physically move his speakers, which means there isn't room behind them for thick panels. So could these tubes positioned beside his speakers be effective? No.
I mean, only if it's pretty much exactly 400 hertz that's resonating like crazy for some reason.
I would throw these in corners. I don't even really know what I would do with
and
these
even
things,
then, I'm a little hesitant to be all about these, because these are a Helmholtz resonator. They have a distinct frequency at which they absorb like crazy, and then they drop off rapidly on either side of that center frequency. And in both cases, for everything you got, it's 400 hertz, which is kind of high. I'm not usually super worried about 400 hertz in a room.
That's a weird frequency to care about.
Yeah,
to be honest with you.
That's very particular for something that I don't necessarily think is your room. With your...
Well, I mean, we know where his problems are, right? I mean, from what he has graphs. He's got a little bit lower than 60 and a little bit lower than 40.
And these ain't doing that.
These ain't doing that, so I would eBay these things. I'm be honest with you. I'd get rid of
kind
them.
of my, again, because he just enjoys experimenting and measuring, by all means, put these around your room somewhere and just see what the heck they do. But do not be surprised if it's nothing particularly beneficial, because I wouldn't anticipate them being super beneficial, to be honest.
For those of you that don't understand, Helmholtz resonators, what they do is they vibrate at the same frequency, at a given frequency, and they do that because if you have a single let's say we have a single subwoofer and you have a huge suck out at one frequency, right? Well, the solution historically has been, you've got a 60 hertz suck out. Here's a 60 hertz Helmholtz resonator. You put it on your wall or in your room someplace. It vibrates whenever the subwoofer starts engaging that frequency, just like if you've ever heard something ring, because of a sound, it's the same
sympathetic resonance.
So it starts vibrating at 60 hertz, and now you have essentially two subwoofers.
Yes.
At that one frequency. and that's it. So
and then we found out, if we just have two subwoofers playing across the room from each other, it works at all the frequencies, not just one. Yeah.
So I would expect that you would put these in your room, and now you're going to have probably a boost at those frequencies that wasn't there before,
or a larger dip than you want.
Yeah,
that's possible.
It's going to be something.
Yeah,
I would expect it not to, like Rob said, I wouldn't expect it to be beneficial. I would expect it to be actively bad.
Yeah, but by all means, when you enjoy the experimentation and measurement, try it out, see what it does, but that's sort of what we're anticipating. For your SBIR concerns, I mean, I'm not super concerned about it because we can do that with the crossover. As long as you aren't someone who insists on running your front speakers full range, you can basically ameliorate that with the crossover. But if you didn't do that, Gick is not the only source, or he's obviously done some other DIY. Like, as long as you've got about 3 inches of insulation, if your speakers are really close to the wall,
not 3 inches to that wall. I can't believe that they're 3 inches. Come on, man.
Exactly. Yeah. So
you've got space back there.
Yeah, as long as you can do that. If your speakers are really close to the wall, the SBIR effect will be happening at a higher frequency that about 3 inches of insulation is able to treat. So it might mean that the backs of your speakers are right against that 3 inches of insulation, but that's okay. You can do that, and that's the way I would do it rather than these tubes.
Yeah, and we have an article over AV Gadgets that Andrew wrote about determining the perfect distance of speakers from walls, and it talks about SBIR.
So the next 3 questions, I did already respond by email, so let's try to burn through them quickly.
All right, whatever. Ryan says he's been helping a friend set up a new 3.1 system, and the first time they started listening to music, the receiver went into thermal protection mode with a 2-second blinking red light. After a few minutes of listening, they let it cool, listened for a few more minutes, and it did it again, and then it failed to turn on at all. He has a Denon X2700H SVS Prime Towers for the left and right speakers, Prime Center speaker, and SB3000 sub. He's using my price 14 gauge speaker wire. Prior to listening, they ran Audyssey, set up the speakers to small and the crossovers to 80 hertz. They were sitting around 10 feet away in the 12 by 15 foot room with 9 foot ceilings. They were listening at -5 to -7 dB in stereo. No sound out of the center speaker. It was a temporary setup, so the receiver was in open air on a shelf away from the wall 6 inches with no other electronics around it. In the permanent setup, the system will be in a room with vaulted ceilings and open space to the kitchen and dining room. He was hoping to hit reference volume at 12 feet in that space. Is that asking too much for that receiver speaker setup, or was there something wrong with that receiver, or maybe they did something else wrong? He has exchanged the receiver but wanted to get our thoughts. He would prefer not to get a separate amp just for the fun of it. If a separate amp is needed, any recommendations that will get the job done, but keep the cost down as much as possible. This is Prime Towers.
12 feet away.
12 feet away. 2700H. The SVS Prime speakers are not the most efficient speakers, if I remember.
But they're not that hard to drive either. They're very typical.
This very much seems like a speaker wire.
This was a short circuit.
Yeah.
This was definitely a short circuit. Now, the most common way that we get a short circuit, we've said it before, but nobody ever thinks it could happen to them. And I did get a response from
including me when it did happen to me.
They did use banana plugs, but that means at some point you inserted some speaker wire into the barrel of the banana plugs. You tighten the banana plugs down or use the little screw things to hold them in there. And there was one little strand, one teeny tiny, very hard to see little strand of wire that was poking out from that banana plug. Almost certainly that's what this is.
Sometimes the banana plugs have metal barrels on them too.
Sometimes they do.
If you weight them in a certain way, they can get close enough to short circuit across. That's one of the reasons I like the ones with the plastic on the outside. Even though the metal ones look nicer, the plastic ones on the outside, I feel are safer.
If you happen to use very heavy speaker wire that's sagging them down and pulling them towards each other.
Gotta have 10 gauge wire. That's right.
I mean, it wasn't this. This is 14 gauge motor price, so it should have been doing that. But this is almost certainly, when you were connecting the banana plugs, one little strand was stray, and nobody can blame you for not seeing it because the strand, we're not talking like you had the whole bunch sticking out. One little strand, they're like hair-sized. It's super easy to not see. So the fact that you returned and exchanged the AV receiver, just redo the speaker wire, triple, quadruple check it, it was almost certainly that. It is within the realm of possibility that the short was happening inside the receiver.
Inside, right.
But
those are the two places, but it's so rarely from inside that it's almost always
the thing we can assure you is this is not, in the setup you were using, that the receiver simply didn't have enough power to play your Prime Tower speakers in stereo at -5 on the volume dial. It's not that the amplifiers in this receiver are so weak that they just cannot power the speaker. They are absolutely sufficient for a 12-foot listening distance with the speakers that you've got. You do not need an external amp, and the reason it went into protection mode was not that the amplifiers were crying uncle, it's that there was a short circuit, for sure.
Yeah. And I would expect that you can get pretty close to reference volume at 12 feet with this receiver.
12 feet should be no problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Joseph has a Sanus equipment rack and a Monolith 7X amplifier, which weighs 93.2 pounds because monoprice is all about adding lead.
Well, ATI. No, that's ATI, man. That is all power supply. Those are two gigantic toroidal power supplies that are accounting for most of that weight.
Yeah, he wants at the shelf that can handle the weight, but he's in Canada, and the options he found were about $200. He's hoping to pay closer to $100. Any suggestions? I suggest you not put it inside a piece of equipment, to be honest with you. I suggest you set it off to the side on a couple of cinder blocks that are dressed up with a piece of wood on top or something like that. I mean, literally, that's a hefty 93 pounds is a hefty amplifier.
It is, and most rack shelves are rated for 50 pounds. That's the typical. So we are looking for a heavy duty. He did find directly from Sanus, but like he says, $200 or more. So the good thing about equipment racks is they're standardized. They're all 19 inches wide. The spacing on all of the, where the little screws go in to attach things, that's all standardized. So StarTech, which is just a Chinese brand, they have a heavy-duty shelf rated for 175 pounds. Should be able to handle this. It connects, unlike a lot of rack equipment, it connects at both the front and the back, which you would expect for something heavy-duty and rated for 175 pounds. Also, critically, you can adjust the depth. because a lot of even the heavy duty shelves are only 16 inches or 18 inches from front to back. And I know that those monolith amplifiers are very, very deep as well as very, very heavy. So being adjustable, it can adjust all the way back to 38 inches if you have like a double rack setup. It can span across two of them. So there's two versions. There's a solid shelf and a vented shelf. The solid shelf is $120 Canadian, and the vented version of it, which just has slats cut out of it so you can have more airflow going through, is $140. So both of them are over the $100 that you mentioned, but closer to $100 than $200, and should be able to do the job. So a link we'll have to that, to the StarTech heavy duty shelf.
The other solution for this too is you buy a TV stand. Like for those of you that are investing in TV stands, the top is always rated for a lot more than any of the shelves on the inside. So you end up, if you're afraid that it's going to break the shelf on the inside, which something like this might, you just put it on top. And that doesn't look as nice or whatever, but
it's also going to be probably producing the most heat out of anything in that rack. So you do want it at the top.
Yeah. Jay, faced with needing a new HDMI cable right away and not having time for Monoprice or Amazon delivery, Jay suddenly realized he didn't know exactly what to grab from a store shelf. The HDMI spec numbers have gotten confusing. It's because HDMI doesn't want you to use those numbers, so...
You don't want amendments? You don't want to figure out what amendment to your HDMI you need?
He just needed a 6-foot cable for his Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. He could have sworn the player itself only has HDMI 2.0 port.
That's correct.
But the HDMI cable is labeled as 2.1 lists dynamic HDR as one of their features, and he wanted to be sure Dolby Vision is going to work. So what's the deal with these days? What type of HDMI cable is needed for what? And is there something you can grab from a physical store that isn't overpriced? I'm sure there is. I have not shopped for it. I will say it's very, very important to understand that HDMI 2.1 in general is really only necessary for gaming.
That is really the easiest way to think about it. HDMI 2.1, the 40 or 48 gigabits per second, is only if you need to do more than 4K 60. All right? If you want to do 4K 120 or you want to do 8K 60, which would only be gaming systems or high-end PCs at this point, that is when you need ultra high speed. Now, the thing is, if you just want to, from this point on, buy nothing but ultra high speed cables.
Fair enough.
Because then it's going to be backwards compatible. And if you do get a PS5 or an Xbox Series X or a high-end gaming PC, you're going to be able to use that without having to buy yet another HDMI cable. And ultra high speed is going to be backwards compatible with everything. So over at Best Buy, assuming you have a Best Buy nearby, that's like the easiest thing I could think of where you're going to go locally. They've got their Best Buy Essentials line. $15 gets you the 6-foot ultra high speed certified, and it's fully certified. It's got the hologram, it's got the
That's
QR
what you're
code.
looking for.
You want the
hologram and the QR code. We've talked about that a number of times on AV Gadgets as well, where that's the only really good thing that HDMI is doing right now, as far as I'm concerned, is making sure that things get certified, and then giving the consumer a way of knowing. The bad thing is that they are not really super good at telling people about it.
Indeed. The marketing
we know
could be
about
better.
it. We know about it, but people are like, I don't know which cable to buy. I'm like, well, I don't blame you.
Now, that's the easy and safe, because that's going to be ultra high speed and it'll handle everything. But if you're going, I am not a high-end gamer, I am not going to get a PS5 or an Xbox Series X or a high-end gaming PC, and I do not need 4K 120 or 8K 60, then you can save yourself some money. Because what you need, if you are not a high-end gamer, is a premium high-speed certified HDMI cable, which Best Buy Essentials also sells, and the 6-foot length of that is $8. So it's just slightly more than half the price of the ultra high-speed version. They're
both
premium.
called Ultra on these links here.
Oh, I must have had the wrong link. I'll get the right link afterwards. Sorry. That's just in our topic list as we're talking. Yes. So the premium high-speed version is $8 for 6 feet instead of $15. So if you're not a high-end gamer, and this would apply to your Ultra HD...
$7.
Yes, your Ultra HD Blu-ray player, this would apply, because that only goes up to 4K 60, not to 4K 120 or 8K 60. So premium high-speed would absolutely do the job, and you could save a bit of money. There you go.
Daniel. I mean, Daniel's name is spelled two different ways in this, but I'm sure it's Daniel.
That's a typo. It's Daniel.
Daniel has an APC G-Type G5 rack-mounted power filter. It provides surge protection, isolated filter banks, and sequenced turn on and turn off for its 9 15-amp outlets, 1 on the front, 8 on the back. He wants to keep it, but he wants to add battery backup, mainly just for his TV and internet so that he can continue using those when the power goes out. Which battery backup would we suggest, and how should he connect it to his G5 unit? So Rob's going to suggest a whole bunch of APC stuff because that's essentially what is available. I have just gotten in for review, which I haven't even taken out of the box yet, an the new IO Gear battery backup system. It's like $750, so it's not cheap, but I think it's kind of going to be the only game out there for people who don't want things that look like they should be next to a computer, because it is. There's some differences between what APC has done in the past and what this thing does. Like, this thing is, you are never on mains power. Right. It is always on, and you're getting the full. From my understanding, like I said, I haven't done the review yet. I haven't taken it out of the box. My understanding is that you're getting the full 15 amps from the battery at all times, so that there is never that sort of power interruption, that flicking over from the mains power to the battery power. You never have to worry about that side of it. But it is a much more expensive than what we're talking.
And from what he described for what he wants, I don't think you need to go that far.
He doesn't need all that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with like what my general recommendation for APC battery backup units are, and that is the BR. Then it'll be a series of numbers referring to the volt amps that can be supplied by the battery. So it'll be a BR1000 or a BR1350 or a BR1500 MS. So those are the ones that fall under their gaming performance series. I would mostly point people to the BR1350 MS. It is the best value, in my opinion, the middle one. That goes for $190. So it's not cheap, but it's not crazy expensive. That gives you 6 battery backup outlets and 4 surge-only outlets. It also gives you full voltage regulation, and this is one of the pure sine wave units. This is a little bit important for a lot of modern power supplies that are PFC, power factor correction, that can sometimes get into an oscillation situation with stepped sine wave approximation batteries. That is the reason that APC has moved entirely to this pure sine wave system that they have now in these. So I like recommending those as a general rule of thumb, the BR1350 MS for $190. There is one that just is different cosmetics, which is the BGM 1500. That's the 1500 volt amp version. There is a BR 1500 MS for about $230. The BGM 1500 is also $230, and it's just got some like smoother and curvier lines to it to make it look a little bit more like an Xbox. There's both a black version and a white version, so match it to your Xbox or match it to your PlayStation. But functionally, it's exactly the same. 6 battery outlets, 4 surge only, voltage regulation, and pure sine wave. In this particular instance, I don't necessarily think you need either of those things. I think you would be absolutely fine with one of the back UPS units, and I would point you to the BE850. It's $120, so definitely the least expensive. This gives you 6 battery outlets and 3 surge only. It does not do voltage regulation. It is not pure sine wave. It is the stepped approximation to a sine wave, but for a TV or a modem, that should be fine, or a Wi-Fi router. It should be fine for those things. I mean, I use one of these on my internet equipment, and I've never had any issues, and I have a fair number of short power outages in my area because there's so much construction that happens in my neighborhood that they're always turning the power off for periods at a time because there's oodles of apartments being built all around me. So I've been totally fine with that, protecting my network equipment. $120 I think is all. Now, to cover our behinds, legally speaking, APC says do not plug the battery unit into an existing surge protection. They say plug the battery unit straight into the wall outlet, and to fall under whatever electrical codes and everything, we have to say that is the way to do it. Particularly if you get one of the BR1350 MS or the BGM 1500 units, I would recommend just plugging that into its own outlet because you don't need to duplicate the filtering and duplicate the voltage regulation and that type of stuff. It does all of that stuff itself. So the cover our behinds is plug this thing straight into the wall. If you were to in an unrecommended way, plug the BE850 into your existing G-type outlet, it would function just fine. So that I'll leave it at that.
I see absolutely no reason to do that, though. I mean, plug it directly
unless
into
he
the
just
wall.
doesn't have another wall outlet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Kiran, do we share Kiran's worry about various YouTubers, influencers, and forum posters misguiding home theater newbies and feeling like you're going to develop a complex if you have a modest system and can't live up to the biggest, baddest systems that get all the hype and attention? He's been at his home theater journey for over 15 years now. He only found us a year ago, but in his own experience, he went through a lot of trial and error, spent a lot of money chasing the go bigger, get bigger hype. Go bigger, get better hype, only to eventually find that much more modest system can deliver a fully satisfactory experience. For example, would we believe there's really hardly anything happening below 20 hertz in the vast majority of time, and that the really fun hit you in the chest bass is all above 25 hertz? Wouldn't think that from all the popular sources online. So he is really glad to have found us and thinks our practical, realistic advice matches much more closely with his own experience. But how do we feel about the online sources mostly looking, most people looking for advice are probably going to come across first? Well, you should talk to them and tell them to come to us. Number one, when you see them doing that. Second, if spending any time on Reddit will show you that people absolutely 100% believe that they need tower speakers no matter how damn close they sit to them.
Sure.
And that's all about that. That's all about that. And there's, the amplifier stuff and all that stuff seems to be going the way of the dodo. There's a lot more people out there who are saying, you don't need an amplifier for your clip speakers that you sit 5 feet away from. I'm starting to see more people say things like bookshelf speakers will be just fine in this situation. But not
then again,
nearly.
Maybe it's Tom and he's looking for that. So there could be some of the reader bias going into what you're noticing.
Could be, but yes, there is a lot. But that's always going to be the case, right? I mean, that's always. I mean, what is MTV Cribs all about? Here's my refrigerator full of Gatorade or Red Bull or something.
Sure.
Like,
and I mean, as long as Tom and I continue doing the podcast the way that we do it, we're always going to be way less popular because we aren't doing short, easily digestible sound bites. We aren't hyping things to the moon. We're not being sponsored by anybody.
No.
So it's like, I always come back to, because I mean, sometimes I question things too. And yes, of course, sometimes I see a very popular video that's blowing up all over YouTube and it's on the front page and it's being promoted. And I'm like, well, a whole bunch of that isn't right. And it's like, yeah, there's that part of you that goes, man, a bunch of people, if they listen to that, are going to spend a bunch of money they don't need to spend, or they're going to think this either does something it doesn't really do or makes a way bigger difference than it really does, or that it's the only way to achieve the results that they want, and that isn't the case. But, I mean, like you, I've been at this long enough where all of the advice that I offer, I don't have any credentials to back it up. I don't have a formal education to point at. I've got credentials
and people don't believe me.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference.
The only thing I've got is give some advice, hope that some people try it, and when they do, their experience lines up with what I said it was gonna be in whatever direction, because sometimes I'm saying spend more money than they wanted to, but because in my experience I think it's worth it. But I mean, that's about all I can do. And I've always said my guiding North Star in all of this is I just want to give the advice that I would want to receive if I were the person asking the question. That's all I've ever wanted to do, and that's just honesty and not overspending and trying to jump the line a little bit, in the sense of a lot of times it's that whole, well, if you didn't experience for yourself, you're just never going to believe it and you're never going to learn from it. And that's fine. That's going to be a whole bunch of people.
Like that questioner who was like, oh, I tried out the line of sight for each of my speakers, and boy, that made difference. I'm like, yeah.
That's
why we say it.
That's what it is. So I can't say I share the worry because but here's what it is. I fully understand it because I did feel the worry. I did have those anxious moments where I was like, like this person is being led astray. At some point, you just go, well, we're going to have to let that go because we're not going to reach everybody. Definitely not going to reach everybody. Even if we did, a huge percentage of the people that we would reach if we reached everybody wouldn't want to listen to us.
No.
A bunch of people just need to go through it. And then at the end of it, they're like, oh, turns out these guys were saying the right thing all along, but oh well, too late now. Like,
And some people don't actually want that advice. I mean, they don't want it full stop. They're like, I don't care that it doesn't make a sonic difference. I want the biggest and the best, and that's fine. I mean,
I don't care that it makes a sonic difference. There's a whole bunch of people who are just like, it doesn't matter to me, like
right.
that it's better. Oh well. So yeah, I'm relaxed about it because I'm just doing this for fun. I'm just doing it because I would be talking about home theater anyway. We know there are people who appreciate what we do, and that feels really nice. We don't demand payment for any of it. If somebody wants to give us some compensation, that's completely up to them. So, like, I just feel very guilt-free. I feel very relaxed about it. I enjoy doing it, so that's the way I'm going to do it, and I'm not worried because at the end of the day, you do have to say, well, look, everybody out there is their own person. They have a brain in their head. They can choose to hold off and search for more information if they're like, I don't really know if I want to spend that much. Or they can go gung-ho. And as this was something I said on, DJ's podcast when Tom and I were on there, it's like almost no matter what you buy these days, you're probably gonna be pretty happy with it because like it's downright difficult to get something truly awful anymore. Like everything is kind of pretty good. I mean, not literally everything, but like most things that would get recommended to you from anywhere. Maybe it's not what we with more experience and knowledge would say is the best solution or the highest value solution, but the chances that it's going to be a downright bad experience are pretty darn low. So I don't really worry about it.
So, and lamenting this is, I think, part of getting to a point in the hobby that you have enough experience to have a bigger view of the entire hobby. This is happening with me in cycling.
Absolutely.
Mostly because I've done this in home theater. So when people say things in cycling, I'm like, that sounds like BS. That sounds like something people say because they believe it and it makes sense to them, but they've never, ever, ever, ever looked it up.
And it's the echo chamber thing. It's just commonly said, so I will repeat it.
So, one of the things is clipless pedals, and those are the pedals that you clip your shoes into, which, why are they called clipless? It's stupid. Don't worry about it. But, I have a friend who's she just ordered some, and she was talking to me about it. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I said, be prepared to be underwhelmed by how much of a difference they make. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's like 3 to 5%, I think. I did the research. I read a bunch of papers on it and a bunch of, people doing research on it. And it all came down to about 3 to 5% increase overall, in your ride. She's like, I was told it was 30 to 40%. I'm like, yeah, you got lied to. So, but that's what people believe. And, this is part of all of these hobbies. You have to kind of go through this infant stage of, hearing things. But once you've done it once, you can kind of apply it across so many different things, and hopefully there's more and more people who will
the details and the specifics will change, but the type of approach and the type of language, you sort of recognize the patterns of like, oh, that's the thing that everybody says it, but nobody tests it, or that's the thing that's just, it's been around so long that it's just taken as a truthism.
Everyone knows that tower speakers are better than bookshelves.
Sure.
Do they know that? Doesn't sound like that's something that everybody would know. It doesn't sound that way. Like, why would they still sell bookshelf speakers if tower speakers are universally better? Wouldn't they only sell towers? Okay. Infinite Gary. As we know, Gary has multiple audio setups throughout his house, and he tries out lots of different gear and shifts things around to different rooms. In one of his small rooms, about 10 by 10 feet, he swapped out a big box subwoofer for his SVS 2531 PC cylinder sub, which is going back a few years.
Yes.
In terms of sheer output capability, the two subs were pretty close, and obviously both far larger than necessary for that room size.
You don't say.
That, my friend, is an understatement, but yes. When we've talked about oversized subs and smaller enclosed rooms, we've indicated that it's fine, and you're going to have oodles of headroom that you'll never need to use. Otherwise, we seem to be saying it doesn't really matter much which sub you use, but he heard a difference in switching the box sub for the cylinder. Is that something particularly to do with cylinders versus boxes? He prefers the SVS cylinder for what it's worth. What was the box?
He didn't say. I don't know exactly what it was.
Well, he says they have
Yeah, I mean, Gary's never bought a small sub,
Right,
so
right.
I just I believe
So,
that on the face of it.
The fact that they both have the same output capability, that doesn't really matter. What you're worried about is extension and linearity in this case. And again, what I've come to believe more often than not is people like, I heard a difference. Well, okay. Fine. Great. I believe you. I'm not arguing with you, but can you really attribute the difference to the new thing? Or
Indeed.
what are there multiple steps you had to go through between the old thing and the new thing in order to get the new thing to do the thing that you wanted it to do?
It's very easy. It's not as though these are I do know two different subs. Like it wasn't just the box version versus the cylinder. Like these were two different subs, I think, from different brands. So the possibility of one of them is literally just louder than the other is entirely the case. Even if it was two identical subs, just setting the volume knob to the exact same place doesn't necessarily mean that one of them isn't. So that could be an easy explanation. But I would actually think a lot of this could be a placement thing, because in this very small room, assuming it was a frontward firing or a sideways firing box sub versus the downward firing cylinder sub, there could actually just be enough of a difference in where the sound was emanating from, because moving a subwoofer 1 or 2 feet, which if you think about where is the sound emanating, if it's this downward firing cylinder with the smaller footprint, where the sound is emanating might be a good foot or 2 feet away from where the front firing on the big old box actually was producing the sound. That can have a profound impact on the wave pattern that ends up being set up in that room. Because this is a small room, you're going to have wave interactions at a pretty high frequency, a very noticeable frequency. The high frequency means that smaller changes in the distance of where the sound emanated from makes a bigger difference. So I think this could very much be a placement thing. You might say, I put the cylinder sub in the same spot on the floor where the box sub was, but that doesn't mean that the sound is emanating from the same spot, because the big box sub, that driver could be considerably far away from where the downward firing driver of the cylinder sub is. Now, it is definitely not that cylinders inherently sound different from boxes in any way whatsoever, but where you position them in the room, and this is a single sub in this very small room, that can have a profound impact.
Yeah, that would be my guess, as well as the fact that the sub itself isn't going to be exactly located in the exact same spot.
Right.
I mean, between the size of the cylinder and just the footprint, being so much different, did you exactly put it in the same spot? That would be my guess. But I mean, there still could be linearity issues. You ran Audyssey, the microphone could have been set differently, or if that's what you ran. I mean, I don't know what room correction you'd say, but there's a lot of different things that could affect how you're hearing the sound.
Sure.
So
there's also the possibility of there being mechanical vibration differences. Now, these cylinder subs old enough, they didn't have the anti-vibration feet, so it's not that one had anti-vibration feet and the other didn't. But it does have the lower center of gravity. It does have the driver pushing straight up and down in the cylinder versus forward and back and creating more, oscillation in that direction. So it's very possible that the box sub was creating different mechanical vibrations in this room versus the cylinder sub as well. Not saying that is the case, but it is a possibility.
Yeah. And Gary was interested to read the news that E.T. and Jaws will be getting IMAX releases in August and September, respectively. Obviously, neither was originally shot with IMAX cameras, so what's the process of making these IMAX versions? Will it be fake IMAX? It's not shot with an IMAX camera, so someone's definitely going to say that.
Sure.
Are they going to crop the sides to make the original widescreen versions into taller IMAX versions?
I hope not, but...
So there are the two possibilities here. Either the original was cropped to, there is the master itself was actually a wider piece of film that was meant to be cropped on the tops and bottoms in order to be shown in a theatrical release window, but they're still in the original masters. There's still more up and above and below that was never shown before, which would better fit the IMAX screen. And then there'll be some black bars maybe in top and bottom, or they're going to crop the sides and blow that bad boy up. Oh, I mean, that's the third option. Would just be they're going to be shown in the original theatrical aspect ratio, but on an IMAX screen, which would be fine too.
Yeah. So, I mean, exactly what Tom alluded to. E.T., the release is 1.85 to 1, a standard aspect ratio for theaters, but the negative it was shot on was 1.66 to 1. So I don't know. I have no knowledge of what they're actually doing, but the possibility exists that they could make a taller version of E.T. if they go back to the original negative.
I know that you guys have seen this because I've seen it too. On like on TV shows or whatever, on movie sets, they'll show like a shot over the director's shoulder, and the director is looking at a screen that has a big image, and there's like an outline of the window that would be the aspect ratio. And I think this is what this is why you see this 1.66 versus the 185. The negative itself was larger, and they could move it around a little bit if they needed to.
But I have no idea if they actually are doing that, because I mean, oftentimes there are things like the boom microphone or the wheel of a camera that is in the negative and obviously is not supposed to be part of the shot.
They can digitally take those things out these days,
quite possibly.
Right?
So I don't know to what extent they're doing it. Jaws was shot on 35 millimeter film with Panavision anamorphic lenses at a 2.39 to 1 aspect ratio. There is no taller information on the negative for that. Things were already optically distorted to put more width onto the piece of film. So that one, unless they're going to crop the sides, is just going to have to be not an IMAX aspect ratio whatsoever.
Right.
It's just going to have to be the original 2.39 to 1 shown on an IMAX screen. So, I mean...
It's going to be pan and scan.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I mean, the process is, I mean, they just digitize it. They digitize it under IMAX mastering, but that's all it is. They go back to the original film and they scan it in with IMAX digital masters, and that's what will create the version that gets shown on the IMAX screens. Yes, some people are going to call it fake IMAX or LIMAX because neither of these was shot using IMAX cameras, so this definitely is a conversion. But yeah, Jaws is a bit more puzzling to me than E.T. E.T. was already taller to begin with, and then it does have this negative where there's the possibility, maybe it's even just some shots. I don't know if they're going to that extent or not, but the possibility exists. Jaws, the possibility doesn't even really exist. The way it was exposed on the original negative film was already optically shot through anamorphic lenses, so you're not making that any taller than what already existed. There also will be a 3D version of Jaws. They're making a real 3D version of Jaws that will be released at the same time as the IMAX version.
Dale listened with great interest multiple times when we went over how Audyssey Dynamic EQ reference level offset works. He still doesn't get it. He was under the impressions that 5, 10, and 15 values listed in the reference level offset settings were for positive dB volume levels. In other words, it would boost the bass more if you leave the reference level offset at 0. But we made it sound as though that is the exact opposite. What's the deal? I wrote an article called Audyssey Reference Level Offset. What is it and what does it do? It sounds hard to Google, but believe it or not, it comes right up. So on AV Gadget. So we'll have that link.
Yes, which is a great explanation, and I used that article to follow the link to where Chris Kyriakakis, who founded Audyssey, talks directly about this question, because Tom used that to get the information that he put into his article. From. But I pulled
it was like a
support forum,
FAQ support forum question, and it was way down there. I had to scroll way down.
Yes, so this is straight from Chris Kyriakakis' typewriter. This is from his keyboard. This is straight from Audyssey Labs' take. I'll just do a couple of quotes that I think do a perfect job of describing this. Is as you go from 0 default offset to 15 dB offset, you are telling dynamic EQ to compensate less. In other words, you have to turn the volume down more before it starts to make adjustments. So I think that says it pretty clearly. All right, it doesn't do anything until you get to -10 or -15. Then it starts to do something. Whereas by default, it would start to do something as soon as you get anywhere lower than 0 on the master volume. That's how it's default set. But if you use one of the offsets, 5, 10, or 15, you have to turn the volume down more before it starts to do anything. He said that very clearly. The other quote directly from Chris Kyriakakis is, dynamic EQ will also operate above 0 dB on the master volume to preserve the reference balance. So that is sometimes the question, does it do anything above 0? Yeah, it can. 0 is where it does nothing by default. The reference level offset changes essentially where that default begins. You're now saying default begins at -5 or -10 or -15. I agree. It's super confusing because they don't put a minus in the setting. The setting is positive numbers, 5, 10, 15, not -5, -10, -15. And the descriptions of select this content for classical, select this for jazz, select this for rock, doesn't really help you. But if you think it through, if you think about a rock concert recording, which has peaks of 120 decibels, not 105 like a movie, 120, you're saying, okay, I don't actually want 120. If I left my master volume at 0, it would give me 120 decibel peaks. How far do I have to turn the volume dial down to get 105 decibel peaks? Well, I have to turn it to -15. That's what it says to use the 15 decibel reference offset for content that goes to 120. They're saying use the 15 decibel offset because you are going to turn the master volume dial down to -15 so that now the peaks are 105 instead of 120. That's the logic.
And he gives a bunch of different types of music or content that's like, oh, this setting is for classical music, this is for jazz, this is for rock music or whatever. But there is no hard and fast rule.
There certainly isn't.
What it really means is he's saying movies are mixed to 0 dB to the reference level. That's what movies should be mixed to. Not all of them are. Should be mixed to. Okay? So that means that that's the setting you do. But there is no like law that says you have to mix.
Nope.
Which is the problem.
There's no standard in music.
And music in particular tends to be mixed hotter, so therefore you don't want it to be, you won't turn the volume dial up as much, which means your reference level now becomes -5 and we know this from having different apps, right? Like different apps on your Xbox or whatever.
YouTube
when you go to Disney
Plus.
Yeah. Disney Plus, I'm at like -6, -7.5, and on YouTube, I'm at -30. So, I mean, there's a massive difference between the two. And that's all this is saying, is that your reference level now is not 0 on the volume dial, because that is actually way too loud. That's way above what actual reference level is. So you would never turn it up that high. You would only ever turn it up to fill in the blank. And then that's where you change this. And the problem is that no one is ever going to change this on the fly because it's dumb.
And because it goes from recording to recording, or at the very least, source to source.
I mean, well, let's just talk about CD to CD, right? I mean, and then you're streaming on Tidal versus streaming on Spotify versus streaming on Pandora. It's all different. Yeah. It's all different. But so
the key sentence right from his mouth, you have to turn the volume down more before it starts to make adjustments. Right. That's what happens as you go to the higher values of the reference level offset. So I think that clears it pretty, as much as I can hope to clear it up.
If that's not clear, I don't know what to tell you, dude.
That's right.
I mean, read the article. Okay. Dale uses a pair of SB3000 subs during really loud, deep bass, pretty much only in movies. At least one of his SB3000 subs is making a squeaking sound. He can't quite tell if it's one or both subs. Turning the volume down stops the squeaking, and he's never heard it during music. Any idea of what to do? He can't see anything obvious from the outside. That sounds like, I mean, it could be a lot of things, but that sounds like the voice coil could be maybe out of alignment in some way. Could be,
maybe it could be like one of the posts that the grill goes into. It could be one little screw holding in either the amplifier or the driver. It could be where the feet screw in at the bottom.
I remember when I took the feet off of one of my subs, I didn't realize that I didn't realize that the threaded inserts were just holes into the inside of the sub, and suddenly my sub was hissing. So step one would be find a place in the movie that you can easily replicate, go back to over and over again. That makes this happen. Make it happen. Turn off one sub. Make it happen again. Turn off the other sub and turn on, whatever. Switch subs. and then figure out if it's one or both. So that's step one.
Sure.
Step two, I mean, like Rob said, check all the screws, check all the feet, remove the grills, and see if that fixes anything. If that doesn't fix anything, call SVS.
I mean,
That
I would
be my
almost
step
like
three.
call SVS first, because they even do the they'll get on a video chat with you now.
They do now. Yes, I forgot about that.
And work through it with you. Like, it doesn't cost you anything. They provide it for free, so there's really no downside. And they, believe me, the folks at SVS are the type of people who they want to fix this, because their subwoofer is not supposed to squeak. So they
will not like that,
want this fixed. They're probably bothered by it more than you are. So absolutely, call them. There is no downside. They're super friendly. They answer right away. You're not going to be hanging around waiting a whole bunch of time or something like that. So yeah, but I think it's going to be, I'm betting you it's like one of the feet isn't fully screwed in. There's like this tiny little bit of air squeaking out or something like that. But yeah, absolutely give them a call. That's like my first thing to do.
All right. Raf. Raf lives in Adelaide, South Australia. Been there. It was a heat wave when I was there. It was like 45 degrees or something.
No, thank you. No, thank you. No.
He wanted to support locally made speakers, so he's ordered 5 VAF speakers, 3 I-25 coaxial bookshelf speakers for the LCR, the left, center, and right, and a pair of I-91 Mark II bookshelf speakers for the surrounds. Both models are spec'd at 6 ohms nominal, 88 to 90 dB with 2.83 volts to 1 meter sensitivity with 150 watt power handling. Both models have 2 sets of binding posts. Raf has a Denon 8500H, which can be set to biamp all 5 channels if desired. His room is 15 by 13 by 11 and fully enclosed. He's sitting 9 feet from a center speaker, so would it be a waste of time and speaker wire to biamp his 5 VAF speakers from his 8500H, or could there be a noticeable difference? It is a massive waste of time.
In this setup?
Yeah.
Waste of time. Waste
you
of speaker
are
wire.
9 feet from fairly.
Yeah, I mean, he might be 10 or 10 and a half from his front left and right, because they're at the hypotenuse. But regardless, these are not super difficult to drive speakers. Very typical efficiency. Yes, the 6 ohm nominal means that it's like maybe 86 and a half to 98 and a half sensitivity instead of the 88 to 90 that's listed. But these are very typically efficient. There's in your setup, there's no reason to do this. Now, what could biamping from one AV receiver? This isn't I'm sending it out via pre-outs to 2 separate amplifiers. This is the amplifiers that are built into the AV receiver. Could that even do any difference? The answer is it can, in the sense that, let's say you were only driving a pair of speakers, and you actually had low enough efficiency speakers or a great enough distance between your listening position and the speakers that you needed to go beyond what a single amplifier channel of that AV receiver can output through its output transistors. There is a limit to how much wattage can come out of a single channel of that AV receiver, and that limit for the single channel is lower than the total amount of power available from the AV receiver. So in that scenario, if you were to biamp just a pair of speakers that are low efficiency or you're sitting really far away, you could deliver a total number of watts through 2 of the AV receiver's output channels versus the amount that could come out of a single channel. And that total amount between the 4 channels that you would end up using to biamp one pair of speakers would likely be within the range of the total amount of power that the AV receiver can deliver to like all channels, right? Because it's got one power supply. That power supply's total pool of watts is being divided between all of the output channels. But there is a scenario where biamping from a single AV receiver could provide more power to one speaker than a single output channel would be able to provide. But doing it across 5 speakers, not really going to be the case. You're going to run into the limits of the total pool of power before you're going to run into the limits of a single output channel. And then you just don't need it. For the distance you are from these speakers, you just straight up don't need it. So don't waste the speaker wire. Leave the jumpers into those dual binding posts and just connect each speaker to a single channel.
Yeah. How long is this John question?
Not too long. I think we can do John's and that'll be it.
Okay. John has gone back and forth many times about exactly which speaker he's going to get, including DIY options, but he's finally pretty sure he's going to go with HSU CCB8 speakers for the front. But $440 each after shipping, and with a rather large size, he doesn't want to use another pair as surrounds. He'd like something under $500 a pair and a little smaller in size. Should he get the HSU's HB1 Mark II horn bookshelf speakers or something else? These are the coaxial ones, right?
Yeah, so the CCB8s, they are coaxial. It is like the tweeter is recessed down into the throat of the driver in the middle, so it's got its own little bit of a horn effect being applied to the tweeter. So they are high efficiency. It is an 8-inch woofer that is surrounding that tweeter that's nestled down into the throat of that driver. So my take is you do still want something that's pretty high efficiency, because we don't want to have wildly different trim levels going on in your AV receiver and run
these
into...
are 94 dB efficient.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
that.
So I mean, here's the thing: the horn speakers from HSU, I would not call them a perfect timbre match for the CCB8s. It's not that just because they're the same brand, they have, a perfectly matching timbre. There is a little bit of a timbral difference between them. I wouldn't have any problem myself using the HB1 Mark II horn bookshelf speakers as surrounds, because I don't think it's critical that the surrounds are a perfect timbre match. It's close, all right? I mean, it is all HSU. They are aiming for neutral response. It's not like they're going for some crazy wild frequency response. They're aiming for neutral response, but I wouldn't say that the two of them, in a critical A-B comparison are a perfect timbre match. I think they're close enough that as surrounds, I have no problem. So I'm quite happy to stop there, because I don't really think there's a point in looking to, equally inexpensive, high efficiency speakers. Like, what else are you going to get? Like, Bix? Like, that's maybe something from JBL Arena, something like that, But
I don't really have a better option for you.
I don't have anything that I would point to that I would say is a better match in any way. In fact, the only other ones I can point to, I would say, are a worse match than HSU's own HB1 speakers. So I'm quite happy to say, go for those HSU horn-loaded bookshelf speakers, because as surrounds, I think you're never going to really notice that little bit of a timbral mismatch.
So his whole desktop headphone setup uses balanced equipment. Recently, his Grace standard USB DAC has developed a flaw where the left channel output is way quieter than the right channel, and no amount of fiddling with the output from his computer can fix it. So he's looking at a few options to replace that USB DAC. Would going with a Bluetooth option degrade the sound quality? If so, he'd be choosing between the topping E50 at $270 or the topping D10 at $140. Is the price difference worth it? So, I mean, Bluetooth, there are a bunch of different codecs that Bluetooth is compatible with, and I have headphones that have used, and my phone is recent enough that it will use all those different codecs. The general one, which is what, AD2P or something like that, or A2DP, I don't remember what it's called. That's like the general one. That one, has like essentially it will kind of max out if it uses its own transmission codec, which is SBC. That one will max out around kind of the equivalent of 240 MP3 quality. But it can send AAC natively, which would be closer to CD quality. But what you really want is aptX or higher.
At least,
so aptX will get you most of the way to CD quality, if not all the way there.
HD now, which is claimed to be equal to CD quality. There's still data compression going on, so it isn't literal CD quality.
I don't know why you would want to go with Bluetooth if you're...
Yeah, this doesn't sound like your jam, man.
I mean, so the answer to the question is, would I be okay with Bluetooth? And the answer is yes. I don't think you would be okay with Bluetooth, but I would be willing to bet most of the time you're not going to be able to hear a difference.
Well, I mean, the other thing is I'm more worried about getting aptX low latency than I am about getting anything else, because I mean, if you'd want the lips to whatever you're watching on your computer to line up with how it's coming out,
that's
regular
been the biggest
Bluetooth.
Problems. So when I was trapped in my bedroom with COVID, I had headphones, Bluetooth headphones that I was using, which I've used before, and they've been perfectly fine. They were not okay to watch movies with, or TV shows with, because the delay was unmanageable. I could not stand it. So, and we watched TV in there on with a Bluetooth speaker, and my wife never once mentioned that the lip sync was off, and it was driving me absolutely batty. So when I was watching stuff, I was actually using these headphones, the Oppo, whatever they're called,
PM2s. I think those ones are.
These are threes.
Those are threes. Okay.
These are the small ones. Okay. Yeah, the sealed back small ones. But I used these because I couldn't take it. I couldn't take the delay. But yes, you would want delay if you're going to watch content. But I don't think you want Bluetooth full stop.
Nah, I wasn't even really considering it for John, to be honest. So, I mean, to answer the question as wrote, I mean, I'm relying on the measurements that are out there for these two different topping DACs. The E50 has spectacular signal-to-noise ratio, like beyond what any format could do. Just a zero noise floor for all intents and purposes, and a spectacular signal-to-noise ratio. So, I mean, that would be their justification for it being $130 more, which in the land of audio is not a crazy amount of money. Like, this is the type of thing that's going to be packaged inside of somebody else's case and charged $2,700 for, without much question, because a bunch of that nonsense still goes on in this industry.
Right.
So, spec-wise, the D10, when it's measured, I mean, it has completely sufficient signal-to-noise ratio. It's 105/106 signal-to-noise ratio, which is, beyond what CD quality. CD quality is 96. That's the signal-to-noise ratio, is 96 dB in CD quality. So 105/106 is beyond that, but it's not all the way up to what the high-resolution audio formats have a theoretical signal-to-noise ratio of, which the E50 does. I mean, it goes beyond what any format could deliver. So I don't know. Like, to me, audibly, the difference isn't actually there. I can't hear it. But if you're worried about what the specs are, and I mean confirmed by measurement, then that is the reason that the E50 costs more. And in the land of audio, I don't think its price is insane. I don't think you should buy any of those things, though. I think you should go complain to Grace, like get the thing repaired, because what it sounds like, this is a balanced DAC. It sounds like one of the signal parts of that balanced connection is not functioning anymore, because he's still getting sound out of that side, but it's way quieter, which is what happens in a balanced circuit if you lose one of the, like, there's two signals in one ground in the balance, and normally the two signals, one of them is inverted. So when it goes down the cable, if those two signals pick up any noise, because one of them is inverted at the receiving end, it flips it over so that they're both the same side up, and any noise that was picked up along the way, now it's inverted and cancels itself out. That's the reason you would use balance. You really don't need it for a headphone setup because you're not going 300 feet, I guarantee it. But regardless, that is how the balance connection works. It sounds like one of those signals is just not there anymore, which is why you're still getting some sound, but just half the volume, because that's what's going to happen.
It sounds like it might be even like a simple solder problem, or a wire connection, or maybe even the little post broke off inside.
Because I mean, he knows it's not the headphones themselves, because he can connect it to other things, and the headphones are still fine, so it's not the headphone cable, but it means that the XLR jack or the TRS jack, I'm not sure which is being used in the particular Grace DAC that he has, but it just means that one of those signal connections on what did he say, the left channel, it's not functioning anymore. So I would go complain to Grace and get it fixed. I wouldn't pay hundreds of dollars to buy something new. It's just not necessary. But if he just wanted a change, I can't really tell you, the information on what is the difference between the E50 and the D10. That's what it is. The signal noise ratio, the noise floor, it is measurably superior on the E50, not to the point that I would call it audible, but on a technical level, it does exist. It can be measured and verified.
Right.
It's too bad we didn't get to Terry, because he's all about Auro 3D. But
that's all right, Terry.
So
who else do we have left other than Terry?
Indeed, Terry, Dan, and Aras are on the list. So we'll be getting to those next week.
That's right. You want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. I want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Aras for going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 139 patrons over at patreon.com, including Tom, Dale, and Terry.
Yes, indeed. Aras, thank you so much for the PayPal donation. Come to our website, avrant.com, and click on the right-hand side where it says Support AVRant, the picture of the cup of coffee, if you want to make a one-time PayPal donation. And then patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the other way to support us financially. 139 people have done that. Tom, Dale, and Terry, thank you for being 3 of them.
I also want to thank Dale for giving me permission to use any photos he may or may not send us in the future, and the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Tom, Dale, Kiran, Terry, Andrew, Dan, Kevin, and Aras.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Dale. I'll try to remember to forward any more of your photos to Tom as they come into question@avrant.com. And Tom, Dale, Kiran, Terry, Andrew, Dan, Kevin, and Aras, thank you all very much for those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We super duper appreciate it. And a big time thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Mantry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.